Here we go, guys, with another recap of the Superbet Chess Classic held in Bucharest, Romania. We are in a day 2, game 2, and we have a big clash. We have a Liren, the newly crowned world champion, against Fabiano Caruana. Everybody probably knows who Fabi is. So Fabi with the black pieces, Liren with the white pieces. We were expecting a lot of fireworks in this one. Of course, Liren is coming from the world championship match. It's understandable that perhaps his energy levels are not yet replenished. Nevertheless, with the white pieces, this type of 2800 level players, world champions type of guys, they're expected to play for a victory with the white pieces. Let's see what happened in today's game. Liren starts with the move c4, and of course, we've seen a lot of ideas from Ding at the World Championship match, mostly with the move d4. We've even seen him play the London system. We have a short on that to express our view on the London system. But in today's game, he decides to go with 1 c4. Knight to f6, g3, e6, bishop to g2, d5. Everything is very standard up to this point. Knight to f3, bishop to e7, and now a castle, and a d4. And as Fabi mentioned in the post-game recap, which we did, we more or less did on the official broadcast. It almost felt like a recap with Fabiano. He did mention that Ding did play this move b3 in previous games. In fact, I believe he mentioned it was against Nepo himself, this move b3. But in this case, he decides to go with d4. And I asked Fabiano whether he was expecting this move. He said that yes, most likely this was something that came in his preparation before the game as well. So nothing surprising up to this point. D takes c4, a very typical way of playing the Catalan. By the way, we are now in the throes of the Catalan, which is pretty much one of the most disputed openings in the world, alongside the Berlin and many others. But of course, Catalan, whenever you start with d4, we've seen Magnus Carlsen essay it in Dubai last year against Jan Nepomniachtchi successfully. So since then, it kind of became a very trendy topic, and it was before as well. Catalan, it's been played forever. D takes c4, queen to c2, a6, a4, and this is basically the big surprise of the game. The main line in this position with black pieces goes with bishop to d7. Bishop to d7 makes a lot of sense. Queen takes c4, bishop to c6, set this bishop on this diagonal, and then after bishop to g5, by the way, white can play in a million ways. Bishop to g5 is one of the main lines, and now black usually continues with bishop to d5, starts harassing the queen. I mean, the theory just begins at this point, and you can spend your whole life, in fact, analyzing this position and still not get to the bottom of it. So I'm not going to bore you to death with a bunch of other moves. If you are interested in delving deep into Catalan analysis, well, have at it. Have some fun with it. Let's get back to the game position. Knight to c6 was played by Fabiano, and this is the second most played move. At the same time, it took a backseat in the last few years, mostly due to the engines. The engines are considering this to be inferior to bishop to d7, which is the main line. We've discussed that it's considered to equalize, or at least give black serious chances of doing so. Knight to c6, considered to allow white to potentially try to get an advantage out of the opening. But of course, Fabiano says, no, I don't believe you that. I've analyzed this position deeper than you. I have the element of surprise as well, because, again, knight to c6 perhaps was not necessarily in Ding's preparation before the game. So why not? Let's try it out. Knight to c6. Queen takes c4, knight to a5, and now we kind of understand the ideas behind this move, knight to c6, and by the way, they're very concrete. One of the things that you don't want in this position after queen takes c4 is remain with the knight on c6. If I manage one more move in the position, I'm going to play the move either bishop to f4 or bishop to g5 and then rook to c1, put some pressure on c7. And if I manage to block your knight from moving, this knight is going to be extremely badly placed. That is, as we've seen perhaps a minute and a half ago in this video, this square c6, you would definitely love to have the bishop on. You would definitely love to have the bishop on the long diagonal somewhere. You cannot play the move b6, obviously, because you're going to lose the knight on c6. So you have to do something. Bishop to d7, bishop to c6, where you're going, right? There's a knight on c6. You have to do something, and it has to be very concrete, and it has to be very fast. That's why the line goes after knight to e5, queen to c2, and now b6. Black is trying to get the bishop on the long diagonal. Challenge, probably the most notorious piece in the Catalan, the bishop on g2. Knight to e5, opening the bishop on g2, bishop to b7, bishop takes b7, knight takes b7, and of course, white is going to plant a knight on c6. It makes perfect sense. This is a beautiful square, by the way. I mean, look, if you are telling me as a coach when I first started playing chess that the backwards pawn on c7, this ugly looking knight, at least at first glance, on a b7, a beautiful knight on c6 for white. I mean, I'm looking at this position and I'm saying black is in deep trouble. You have so many weaknesses. I control the center. I have at the pawn on d4, which it gives me more control than you have over the center because I have more of a presence in the center. I have beautiful knight on c6, potential target on c7, ugly knight on b7 for black. I'm going to give it before 20 years or 10 years before, when we didn't have engines, probably the players would have looked at this position, get to this point in their analysis and say that black is borderline winning. It's not the case with new engines. Knight to c6, queen to d7, and this is a big moment because queen to d7, by the way, it's a novelty. This is Fabiano's novelty, quite a significant one, I have to say. Queen to e8 was played in previous games. In fact, Ding himself faced this move against Alireza Firouzja, or Gucci-Reza Firouzja, however you want to call him. Nowadays, he's a fashion designer as well. And by the way, he's been sporting some incredible coats in this tournament. Check out the main broadcast. You will see him. He has some pins in his... It's wild. Whatever he's doing, it's definitely working. It's having an impact. Now, queen to e8 was the move that Fabiano did mention during our post-game analysis on the main broadcast. Rook to d1, and the idea is that after bishop to c5, with a queen on d7, you would be able to attack this queen on d7 with knight to e5. On e8, you cannot touch that queen. So generally, the line goes with knight to e5, and this is another key point of the position. You have to dislodge this knight from c6. If you don't do that, then, of course, white is going to have more or less a decisive strategical advantage. If I manage to go knight to d2, knight to f3, get the other knight to the support of the knight on c6, plant and maintain that knight on c6, and that's going to be all she wrote. You don't want to allow that. You want to dislodge the knight on c6. The play is very concrete. So bishop to c5 has to be played. Now, of course, if you take on c5, then I'm just simply going to take on c6, pin the pawn on c5, and now finally you can see that my knight on b7, despite the fact that it's an ugly piece, it does something, right? It attacks the pawn on c5, and that's a tremendous job that that knight is doing. It's looking good for black. Definitely, maybe not big advantage, but black is in the driver's seat. So you cannot take on c5. You have to drop back with the knight to e5. And this is, by the way, I'm showing you the previous game that I mentioned, the one between Ding and Alireza. Bishop to d6 is the move that was played in that game. Knight to c3, you do not want to take on e5 because these type of positions are not great for black. You cannot go to d5, you're going to lose a pawn, so you have to stay passive with knight to d7. The problem is that after knight to e4, once again, I have some big threats. Knight to g5, by the way, is a big one, because if I force you to go g6, let's say you play knight to c5, I go knight to g5, and you have to go g6 to defend against checkmate. Well, if that's the case, look at the position. Your knights are pretty much stepping on each other's hooves. I can just simply go b4. you're kind of in trouble right now. Despite the fact that I have a couple of doubled pawns, that offers me tremendous opportunities on the king side. I will defend that pawn with a move bishop to f4 later on in the game, and then I'm going to go h4, h5, open up the h file, maybe king g2, rook to h1, open up the h file. You're going to get checkmated, on the h file. This is not looking good for black. So of course, Ding was aware of that. Alireza was also aware of that, and of course he did not take on e5. In fact, in this position, he played the move c5, and the game continues as follows: knight to e4, knight takes e4, queen takes e4. Now, of course, I'm attacking the knight on b7. You have to soften up the defense of the knight on e5 with c takes d4 and knight to c4. This is the way the game between Ding and Alireza continued. I'm just showing you all the way until the end game, just to show you potentially maybe what Ding was aspiring to get. Knight to c4, knight to c5, knight takes d6, knight takes e4. This is a very concrete way of continuing the game. Take on e8, take on d4, and white has some pressure in the position. Not much. Black most likely is still very close to equality, but white maintains some pressure. You have some ideas of rook to b4. When the knight moves back, maybe even rook to d6. I have the cooperation between rooks and bishop versus rooks and knight, which we know that rooks and bishop in general is the one that you should want to have and you should want to play with, because it's considered to be superior. So at this point, the engines are saying slight advantage for white. Sure, maybe objectively still very close to balanced, but this is a dream position for somebody that doesn't necessarily have any huge ambitions from this game, but they just want to play a position with a slight advantage that are going to give them an easy game, an easy long game in which they can pressure their opponent, and Fabiano was not willing to go for this. So, back to the game. He played the novelty queen to d7, rook to d1, and now rook to c8, defending the pawn on c7. We were discussing this idea of white trying to solidify the control of this knight on c6, for example, with bishop to f4, also put some pressure on c7, and then get this other rook, the rook on a1, all the way to c1. If I manage to get that as white, I'm going to be strategically much better. So, rook to c8, bishop to g5 is the move that was played, and to be honest, this move is already kind of an invitation to make a draw in this position. A big potential in this position is the move knight to d2. Once again, the same idea, knight to f3, knight to e5, but right now, after knight to d2, and this is a critical moment in the game, bishop to c5 would be the best move. Bishop to c5, you have to attack the knight on c6 as fast as possible. Do not allow white to go knight to f3, knight to e5, bishop to c5, knight to e5, back, and now queen takes a d4. And yes, I can in fact take that pawn, and that is the difference between the queen being on e8 and the queen being on d7. So that's a detail that Fabiano had in mind and had in his file and his preparation as he was getting ready for this game. You can also go after bishop to c5 with the move knight to e4, queen takes e6, knight takes f6, g takes f6. Now we see the king is a bit weakened on g8, and now not take on c5 directly, because if I do that, then you can just simply take with the queen and you're going to be a pawn up, and I don't have enough compensation. But what you can do as white is start with the move b4. Once again, the bishop on c5 is pretty much pinned. You cannot move it. Pin it to win it, pin it for immortality. You know the drill. Rook to d8, b takes c5, knight to d6, and this was the position that Fabiano was mentioning in the post-mortem analysis, and he was saying, and by the way, I'm sure he analyzed this position quite thoroughly with his second in preparation for this game. He was saying that this position, despite the fact that the engine is giving white quite a significant advantage, as you move along through the lines, the engine also starts to understand that the position is much more balanced than you would have thought at first glance. So quite an interesting opening preparation up to this point. And after rook fc8, Ding thinks for a while, plays the move bishop to g5. And as I was mentioning, this is more or less an invitation for equality after h6, maybe the last moment in which white could have played for some slight advantage in the position with the move knight takes e7, another idea that Fabiano was recommending. Queen takes e7, bishop takes f6, queen takes f6, and now just play for the move knight to c3 with the idea that if you do rush with c5 to try to free up your pieces, of course, d takes c5, knight takes c5, open up the c file, activate the knight. This is a dream position for a black, but you're not going to do that as white. After c5, most likely you're going to try to go d5. These are type of positions that we're going to see in this potential game. Another idea that you could do as black is get ready for d5 with this move, queen to e7. Queen to e7, rook ac1, and now c5, d5, and now knight to a5. Try to get this knight back into the game, either via c4, knight to b3. That would be the dream. Of course, attack the rook on c1, and then, you know, the position looks great for black. Also, knight to, not knight to b3, knight to d4, because you cannot touch that square. But c4, knight to b3 seems to be the right way of doing things. And you also want to coax white into playing the move d6. You would love to see this move on the board, because after queen to d7, well, this is in fact problematic for white. You're going to corral this pawn on d6, maybe rook to c6, maybe rook to d8, rook takes d6 at some point. It's not going to be easy for white to defend that pawn on d6. For example, if you play the move e4, then I can go once again c4. If you continue with e5, knight to b3, and we have a very, very complex position. Your rook is not greatly placed, and I do have significant potential for an attack on the queen side as well as black after the move b5. Your pawn on d6 is looking pretty, but it doesn't do that much in the position. So quite intriguing lines. Once again, something that I'm sure Fabiano had prepared in this game. None of this has happened. Knight takes e7 was not played. Bishop takes f6 was a Ding's choice. Bishop takes f6, and now rook to a3. Once again, if you manage to solidify this knight on c6, for example, after knight to d8, rook to c3, or perhaps not even only the knight, but a piece. If you manage to solidify a piece on c6, then white is going to do tremendously well in the position, strategically borderline winning. You definitely don't want to see this type of situations in the game arise. For example, bishop to e7, and you're saying, I'm threatening to play the move bishop to c5, but it's not that easy, because after I play the move e3, bishop to c5, I can defend this rook with the move queen to e4 on the light squares, and you don't have a way to continue the attack. You don't have a way to destabilize my rook on c6. Problematic, strategically busted, maybe borderline busted for black. You don't want to see this on the board. Fabiano understood that, and after the move rook to a3, he found this beautiful idea of knight to c5. Well-known kind of pattern. We've been seeing this pattern quite a few times, mostly with the bishop landing on c5, but in this case, the knight lands on c5. Disrupts the defense of the knight on c6 via the c file. And then, of course, if you take, I take back on c6, setting up the pin. You don't have the c3 square, so all of my pieces right now are placed on very good squares. The bishop on f6, rook to c3 doesn't work because I take that rook, snatch it off the board. That is not the right way to sacrifice the rook. No, that was terrible. Sorry about that. Queen to c6, and white is in some danger right now. You don't want to see that. Well, you do want to see that if you are Fabiano. You don't want to see that if you are Ding with the white pieces. So Ding, in fact, played the very safe move, knight to b4. And right now, we're going to see a repetition. Knight to b7, knight to c6, knight to c5, knight to b4, knight to b7. Of course, if you don't repeat as white, for example, if you try to just simply, I don't know, let's say rook to d3, why not? Double up on the d file. The problem is I'm going to go queen to d6. You start having problems with the knight on b4. If you try to go knight to c6, once again, the same idea applies. Knight to c5. If you go backwards with the move knight to a2, at some point, after I get this queen off the d file, I'm going to go c5. I'm going to liberate my pieces, and I'm going to do just fine. After a long think in this position, as you can see, 58 minutes for Ding, 1 hour and 23 minutes for Fabiano. He thought for a while. He was thinking potentially of finding a way to not repeat the position, but he did not find that way, and probably that was the right decision. As you can see, from 58 minutes, he dropped all the way to 40 minutes in the position. So quite a significant thing. At this point, even from a practical perspective, you probably should just simply repeat the position, accept the fact that with the white pieces, you did not get anything out of the opening, and make a draw, go home, and try again next game. So that was the repetition. Fabiano with the black pieces, quite a comfortable draw. I want to say Ding cannot be happy with the result, but at the same time, he is most likely not extremely upset either, because he made it quite clear after the World Championship match. His main concern right now is to replenish his energy tank, and this is exactly what he's doing without taking too much extensive risk. So draw between Fabiano and Ding in round number 2. And tomorrow we have Fabiano. Who is he playing? I believe he's playing Ricci. I'm going to check on that. I don't remember exactly who is he playing. It does not matter, because I will see you, no matter who he's playing, I will see you here on the C Squared channel. See you guys tomorrow.